talk about compassion. Now, I want to remind everybody that when we talk about the divine qualities of anything, feminine, masculine, we're not talking about that this is the allotment given to males and this is the allotment given to females. We're talking about energetics or energies that actually can be in balance, so that each of us possesses an abundance of divine masculine and an abundance of divine feminine, to the degree that we can choose how to engage with the world. I just wanted to say that because I've met and know, and we have in this room some incredibly compassionate men, and so I just want to just remind us all that we're not talking about women, we're talking about the divine feminine. So, I want to read you this quote. Courageous, wise, authentic, compassionate, peaceful. Whether we are religious believers, atheists, or anything in between, it turns out we can agree quite easily on what it means to be a spiritually evolved human being. The more difficult question is, how do we get there? That's a quote from my friend Cindy Wigglesworth, who has spent the last decade and a half, roughly, creating something called the Spiritual Intelligence Assessment. And it's a really in-depth look at what are the developing capacities of a person who can go into the world and be wise and compassionate and loving and behave that way, despite what's going on. And it's a brilliant body of work. And I love that she always emphasizes in her definition of anything that that these things are capacities and behaviors. Right? So it's one thing to sit in a room and have really loving, compassionate, and peaceful thoughts, but if you go out and rear end the guy in front of you because he's not going fast enough, then you kind of got to go back to the drawing board. So I want, instead of just talking about compassion as this beautiful ideal, I really want to do a deep dive into it and look at it from the very human angle of what capacities we have to develop and what the perhaps stages to develop a real and lasting compassion are. So the first stage is, and this is, obviously, okay, so the first stage is apathy, which means I don't care. I don't care about you. Now, Cindy doesn't say this, but Chris Terry does. If you're trying to move up from hostility, then apathy is probably some progress. So I don't want to discount apathy may not be ground zero. Hostility may be ground zero in some ways, right? So if you can get to a position of, well, I really don't care, then that's probably progress. Okay. The next place that we go to, and this is somewhat hierarchical, right? So we move out of this place of compassion and we develop the ability to have sympathy. Now let me say how I'm using these words because it's important. And I don't think that there's a corner on the market, but I want to make sure that you're hearing the same meaning regardless of the word. So sympathy is I see you and I feel sorry about your plight. But it's not this, it's this. Yeah. Right? So there's an element of, it can feel like one up, one down. Right? Oh, you poor thing. Or, what was that? Bless your heart. Bless your heart. Bless your heart. Right. To step up from apathy, it can motivate behavior. However, it's not a pure experience, right? And so the trick of that is, if we're not on equal ground, then we're separate. We are separate. And if we're not on equal ground, then I'm comfortably away from you. But still, it's better than apathy. So then we have a shift into something we're going to call empathy, which is I feel what you feel. And I'm going to spend a good bit of time talking about this today. So when we get to the point of empathy, it's a peer experience. I have developed the capacity to feel what you are feeling, right? And we're equals. Very important. It's a very important shift from sympathy. When you're sad, I feel the sadness in my body, my mind, and my heart, and/or. The person for whom we have empathy feels this as a very warm and caring response and place to be held. The problem sometimes, though, is that we end up being on a roller coaster. Like, so have you ever had, like, how many of you consider yourselves empathic? Right. How many of you have been, like, knocked around? It's like, oh, God, get me out of their feelings. Right. So that's kind of that's the piece of empathy where we actually have to develop skills in order to handle that. Before we talk about that, let me tell you that I believe that we are hardwired for interbeing. So that capacity to feel with another, that's hardwired in us. And I don't know how quickly I can do this. I'm going to do it as quickly as I can. This came out of an article written by Richard Voyakis and Daniel Goleman in the Harvard Business Review. And these are the two guys that are, I would say, primarily responsible for putting both the theory and the practice of emotional intelligence into the world. And they talk in this article about 3 different types of neurons that we all possess. So I'm going to go over them very quickly. The first one are called mirror neurons, and I'm sure many of you have heard about these. They were accidentally discovered by like a Swedish researcher or something, where he like raised his arm and realized a primate raised his arm, and the research that came out of that, the understanding that came out of that, is that we tend to mirror each other. And this happens physically, it can happen emotionally, okay? All those, at every level, we have the capacity to mirror each other. And that we actually, those neurons are in our brains. The second type of neuron I want to talk about is something called a spindle cell. I don't know a lot about this, but I will tell you that they are present in primates, including humans, but they are actually more present in cetaceans, which are like whales and dolphins, right? And this is the capacity to be connected and read below the level of consciousness, because it happens when I say rapid or ultra fast, it's 1/20th of a second is how fast we actually can get our spindle cells anyway can get a sense of what's going on in a crowd, in a group, in a room, or with other beings, whale pods, that kind of stuff. And they're kind of what give us our social guidance system. Okay, the third type of cell is called an oscillator. And I'm just going to read you this. Oscillators coordinate people physically by regulating how and when their bodies move together. You can see oscillators in action when you watch people about to kiss. Their movements look like a dance, one responding to the other seamlessly. The same dynamic occurs when 2 cellists play together. Not only do they hit their notes in unison, but thanks to oscillators, the 2 musicians' right brain hemispheres are more closely coordinated than are the left and right sides of their individual brains. I experience that, especially with music, as magic. Like, there's just magic that happens, and you can feel it. And now I understand why. There's actually something passing between them that I'm getting swept up into. Of course, I can't actually do what they're doing, but nonetheless, I feel that. So we have all of these potentials in our brains that hardwire us for empathy, and without regulation, they can overwhelm us, right? And so it's no wonder that empaths are often crazy. I don't know how else to say that, right? They're not often crazy. They feel crazy though. Until they learn to manage that, it feels crazy making, right? Because you're standing, you be standing there, somebody walks by and you're like, whew, I feel bad. Well, nothing has happened except for you got caught in somebody else's empathic field, right? So the good news is there are ways to learn to manage these things that make you actually a more effective empath and then move you into the space of compassion. What happens if, well, I want to say a couple of things about that overwhelm. According to Cindy, what can happen is when we don't learn to manage the feelings that come up in an empathic response, that we oftentimes revert. And what she means by revert is go back to a place where we cannot feel with, but we must distance ourselves from. Right? So sometimes that feels like emotional withdrawal. Sometimes we get up in our heads in the safe place. Sometimes we get arrogant, cynical, bitter. Depending on how long-term the strategy is, the purpose of the strategy is always the same, and that is to get us out of the discomfort of those feelings. What I know from my very own, from my human experience is, if I have not processed the depth of my own feelings, I cannot tolerate the depth of yours. I cannot be with you in that place. It doesn't have to be pain. It can actually be immense joy. But if I have not done mine, if I haven't carved out a space to be with you in that place, then I'm out of resonance. I have to back away. So when we get to the place that we're going to call compassion, it is the ability to feel what another feels without having one's circuits overwhelmed. I would call this like a spiritual black belt. The people who can do this on an ongoing basis, this is like graduate or PhD level spiritual maturity stuff. I think we all probably have moments, but those who can walk and talk and be in the world in this way on an ongoing basis, I think there are few among us. So when we get to the place of being in compassion, and that's where, again, that's where you have the capacity to feel with another without being sucked in or overwhelmed by their feelings, right? And I know you guys have seen me do this before, but it's that place of, to feel with another is a very human, it's a human capacity, it's a human response. To equally balance that with a place of equanimity and forgetting that, yes, this is a temporal experience of up or down, pain or joy, and yet not lose the foot in the eternal or in the absolute. That's the only way that I know of to be in compassionate embrace with another person or a situation in the world or anything like that, so I'm not off balance, right? So I'm feeling the depth of, and yet I am clear on the spiritual truth behind, before, beneath, between the feelings. Does that make sense? I'm seeing some, I want to make sure everybody's with me. So this capacity to be in compassion, to have one foot in the infinite or in the eternal, so that we don't lose ourselves in the temporal or in the very human ups and downs. This also is a developed capacity. And about spiritual bypass. Okay, so one of the things that can happen in our attempts to become a place of compassion in the world is we can feel this thing going on here, and then we tell ourselves that we're in touch with the spiritual truth, but actually we've just reverted all the way back to a place of detachment. And that is another tactic that saves us from the real and deep feelings of being human. So as we're learning to stand in a place of compassion and to feel with but not be overwhelmed by, it requires a lot of ongoing self-examination, self-awareness. And then to take that into the world and be able to walk it and talk it and be it most of the time, all of the time. I think perhaps it's one of our highest calls. It's one of the things where, well, I know this. I know it's going to, if there's anything that is going to help the world remember its wholeness, it's going to be our capacity to carry this compassion out into our everyday lives so that we stop otherizing. We stop needing to distance ourselves out of fear or the need to be sane, and we can actually walk in the world in a way that we can tolerate that interbeing. I want to talk about one more thing briefly. And so far in Cindy's work, what I've talked about is, let's call it like there's a verticality. There's like this vertical sense. We go from apathy, we go from hostility to apathy to sympathy to empathy to compassion. But there's another piece to this, and the easiest way I can state it is with how far does the extent of your embrace go? So I might be able to have be in compassionate interbeing with Susan, but can I be open-hearted and in compassionate embrace with John Q. Republican, whose politics I severely disagree with and who's trying to take my rights away? So who's my other? Is John Q. politician or John Q. Republican my other? Or can I extend compassionate embrace to him? It's interesting, Rodney and I were having just a little conversation about this bizarre article that I posted on Facebook yesterday. And one of the things that Rodney hears when he's having conversations around race and racism is, people say, well, but they're nice people. I'm a nice person, or they're nice people. And that may be true and well, but how far does your niceness extend? That's the question, right? So if you're a Democrat, can you extend your niceness to Republicans? If you're white, can you extend your niceness to black? Or another race period. If you're American, can you extend your niceness, your compassion, your openness? Can you extend it beyond national borders? If you're a Christian, can you extend your embrace to all the Abrahamic traditions? How far can you embrace? I feel like I need to give you all an assignment for the week. Yeah, I want to do that. So as you walk through your week, do you guys notice when you close your heart? Do you notice? Just like,
Yep.
What I would ask of you is that you take 3 deep breaths and open it back up when you feel it close. And I want to go back and say why this is so important. You remember those neurons, right? You remember this thing we call a morphic field? You remember the thing I talked about in quantum theory a while back called quantum non-locality? So all of these things conspire, or perhaps all of these things are a different way of looking at the idea that you are leaving your spiritual imprint on every situation. And if in those moments when you're closing off, you can breathe into it and open back up, you are literally gifting the situation or the person with the possibility of something different. And that means you're gifting yourself with that. I also want to say that in developing these capacities for compassion, or this spiritual muscle known as compassion, it doesn't just apply to everybody out there. Sometimes the place that we most forget to open a compassionate embrace is with ourselves. And what I can tell you is if you don't do it with yourself, then you can act out there in a way that may look like compassion, but it's not. That's not a bad idea to act as if, always. But if you haven't been there in yourself, you cannot go there with another. I think I feel complete. Let's pray. So just breathe with me if you would, Joe. Now just become aware of this room, the room itself. And now in your mind's eye, become aware of one person in this room. Pull their face up before you. Maybe it was the last person you hugged or the first person you saw. Maybe it's the person you love most or like least. This soul that is in front of you has a whole lifetime of experience. Unbridled joy and unspeakable pain. All of it coexisting. And the truth of the matter about this person is that they are what you are, and that is nothing but God stuff. step into the field of what might have pain in it, remember that you're actually doubling your joy. So let's leave ourselves there in that place where we remember that to be in unity with another, to be in compassionate embrace with another, it also means to double our own joy. And it's worth it. It's worth it for ourselves. It's worth it for them.